Good morning. It's Wednesday, January the 12th. Let's take a look at our discussion on Helen Keller for the week. I sent in the email a link where you can listen to the story being read. This video is just to discuss the story of Helen Keller and just some things that I want you to know. The first thing I want you to know is that the type of story this is a biography. A biography tells about events in a person's life. In this case, we're going to learn about this girl, Helen Keller. As we read a biography, we're going to look for information about why a person is important. So I want, as you listen to this story, as I discuss this with you, I want you to think about why Helen Keller is important. And this story, the events are in time order. In other words, it's not going to start with her as an old lady and then tell about her as a kid. It's going to start as a kid and tell about her as time goes on. So let's take a look at this biography about Helen Keller. The first thing that I want you to know is that this story takes place in Tuscumbia, Alabama, which is a city in Alabama. And it was a long time ago. It was back in 1886. Here is a drawing of what we think Helen Keller was at the farm. And you'll notice that her eyes are closed. That's because Helen cannot see. She was born with her eyes working. She was born with sight, but she became very ill as a young girl. And that illness took away the ability for her to see. Helen also could not hear. So that is important. So she could not see, she is blind, and she cannot hear, she is deaf. The only way she knew about her world is through touching things. So remember, when she was born, she could see and she could hear, and then all of a sudden, now she can't see and hear. She is scared, she is afraid, and she's angry because why can't I see and hear things? She's confused. I used to be able to do this. Why can't I now? And she's just frustrated because she cannot talk to people. So she does a lot of touching. So for her, there's only silence and darkness. So let's continue on. Now, some things you need to know about Helen. Helen, because she couldn't see and she couldn't hear, she was still trying to communicate with her family. So she made motions, and the story even tells us that she made motions. When she wanted her mom, she would put her hand to her face. When she wanted her dad, she knew that her dad wore glasses, so she would pretend like she was putting on a pair of glasses. When she was hungry, she would pretend to slice bread. So she was smart enough to be able to make these motions to try to talk. But unfortunately, people didn't always understand what she wanted. Helen would also walk up to a person and put her hand on their face and on their lips because she knew that's how they were talking. So she was trying to read their lips through her fingers. So that's something else you need to know about Helen. And by the way, this is a real picture of Helen Keller as a little girl. Now, remember I told you that Helen, all the different ways that Helen was feeling angry and sad and confused and frustrated. Well, she was very, very angry because people couldn't understand her. She couldn't get what she wanted, and she didn't know how to communicate with them. They didn't understand her emotions. And so she would have anger fits. She'd have behavior problems. Look what it says. Sometimes she screamed and kicked and cried for hours. She threw things at people. She hit people. She was hard to control, and her parents were frustrated. The parents didn't know what to do either. So they decided, let's contact Alexander Graham Bell. That's what a doctor suggested because he invented the telephone. And Alexander Graham Bell also taught deaf people. So the parents thought, okay, what do we have to lose? Let's contact him. Dr. Bell referred them to Michael Anagnos in Boston. and he was the head of the Perkins Institute for the Blind. So he was a very important person at a blind school. And Dr. Anagnos promised the Kellers, that's her parents, that he would send a teacher for Helen. It just so happens that teacher, her name is Annie Sullivan. Annie Sullivan, when she arrived, she was trying to teach Helen, and she didn't like her. Helen did not like Annie because Annie was trying to make her mind. Look what it said. She hit Annie, knocked out one of her front teeth. She even locked Annie in an upstairs bedroom. So Helen was doing everything she could to keep Annie Sullivan from staying at the house because this teacher wanted Helen to learn. Here is an actual picture of Annie and Helen. Annie knew that Helen was smart and that she could teach her. Annie taught Helen by making what we call now sign language, by making the sign language letters in her hand. She would, they called it finger spelling. So, for example, when she gave Helen some cake, she would spell C-A-K-E, make those motions in her hand with sign language. She did the same thing with doll, the word doll, D-O-L-L. The only problem was Helen could do those same motions, but she didn't understand what she was spelling and that she was actually touching things. So she was still frustrated. She was frustrated until the day at the well. Annie, the teacher, took Helen to the well and poured water on her hand and was spelling water, W-A-T-E-R. And it was in that moment that Helen finally figured out that the motions that her teacher, Annie Sullivan, was making in her hand spelled the word water. This was a day that changed Helen's life forever. She now learned that those motions, those finger spellings, were words, and this is how she was going to talk to other people. She even wanted to know how to spell teacher because she knew that Annie was her teacher. Now, when Annie taught Helen, Annie didn't just talk to her with one word at a time. She would speak to her in full sentences. So she was learning to do finger spelling in her hand in full sentences. And here's a drawing of these two. Eventually, Helen learned how to read Braille. Braille are a series of raised dots that you read with your fingertips, that blind children read with their fingertips, and blind adults as well. And Annie taught Helen how to do this, and Helen loved it. Helen was extremely intelligent and learned how to read very, very well. In fact, you will find out that Helen not only learned how to read Braille, but she also learned how to write. Helen also learned how to speak, which is very unusual. Most people that are blind and deaf are not able to speak out loud. Helen became very famous because she had learned to write. Her letters she had written to Mr. Anagnos that sent Annie Sullivan, the teacher. He published those letters. People began to write about Helen. They called her the miracle girl. She lived a long, full life. Helen would often say that Annie Sullivan is the reason why she was able to have a great life, because Annie Sullivan allowed her to learn how to communicate with others. I hope you enjoy this story as much as I do. Enjoy reading it, and we'll talk more about Helen Keller all this week and next week.